Now that we're connected to our store in Reflux, loading in some data is as simple as setting a default data set which can be returned in getInitialState, so basically an array of nothing. That way this won't error out the first time you try and it tries to run through and render the data. And then in an init method you can just make a request for some data, and then once that data has loaded just say this trigger and send that data along, so that it can loop through and display each person that is in that data set. For this example, I'm just using the JSON server, which I showed in another video, which just returns an array of people that have a name and an avatar. So there's nothing fancy going on with the request I'm making. So let's go ahead and tear this all down and start from scratch so you can see it being built up. I'll just go ahead and delete everything. Alright, so I'm back to a basic hello world example where I just return a message of hello world, which is now on this.state.message. So this message links up to this message and then renders out as hello world. So to start out, I'll just make a data property here and just cut everything out of this object, paste them up here, add a comma, and say return this.data so that that links to this. And once this refreshes, you can see we're back to hello world. Now I'm going to go ahead and install something called Superagent. So Superagent, and this is a library just for making requests and loading in data. Its sole purpose is for making requests and loading data, so you don't have to use something like jQuery or any other libraries. You'd only have to use this one. So say require Superagent, and it's just by convention that you call this request when you import it. So I'll go ahead and set up our init method here. So init, and in init I can make the request to our URL, which is localhost 3000/people. And then the second parameter takes the response, which is returned in a function, and I'll use the ES6 way of writing this, where I can just say response with a fat arrow, and then inside of this block I can use the response and get the response. And to show you that, I'll just say this.trigger and then pass in an object with a message on it, and this can be response.body and the first person in the array .name. So you see when that refreshes that it gets the first person from my response and returns her name as the new message. So again, this .state.message was originally hello world, but then when the data comes back, it's now being set to what's passed into this .trigger, because this .trigger calls set state inside of my component. So we want to actually loop through every person in the response.body. So we'll go ahead and create a people array. So people, and change hello world to, instead of a string, it's just an array. And then we'll say this.data.people and assign it to response.body. So again, this people is just that people. And then instead of sending an object in, we'll just send this.data. And then instead of this.state.message, now we have this.state.people. And once I save this, you'll see that we'll just get a huge string of just unformatted data, which you just can't read. So let's go ahead and format this a bit using map. So map is going to take a function, and we'll loop through and get a person for each person or each object in that people array. And we'll just use that fat arrow syntax again. And we're going to return an element. So we'll just return a div. And inside of that div, we'll just display person.name. Hit save. And you can see now at least we have a whole bunch of divs with their names in it. Now, just as a note, this paren here and here aren't really required. I just like to use them as a, hey, this is where my return statement starts and stops around HTML elements. It just makes more sense visually to me. And then I can also just do, instead of person.name, I'll just throw in an h2, make it look a little nicer. And then an image tag. And instead of source and a string, we'll just do person.avatar. Close that off, hit save, and you can see we have a nice long set of people with names and avatars loading in.